What is the moment during your relationship that made you decide I will marry you? When he dropped everything to get me to my grandmother's when I was told that she might not live much longer. He refused to let me be alone that night and had me sleep at his place. The next morning he calls out of work, packs a bag, swings by my place to help me get my stuff, and then drives me 450 miles over a mountain in the middle of winter to let me see my grandma one more time. To see the amount of support he gave me told me that I had found the person who would always have my back. When he was reading to his son, my stepson, I was in the lounge so could hear him. And he put all these zany and goofy voices for all the different characters. Totally unabashed in just wanting to do a good job for his son. When I had my first panic attack in front of him and I thought, that's it. He's seen my crazy and I've blown it. I ran to my car and cried. He came to my car, told me to move to the passenger seat, drove around until I was okay to be in public and took me out for lunch and to a bookstore. Reading calms me. I never knew what true loving consideration was before then. That feeling of real, unpretentious and unwavering love was just so much for me in that moment. The first time I had dinner with his family. We had just gotten done with a hike and his dad texted him to invite him and told him he was welcome to bring me. I was hot, sweaty from the hike, dressed like a hooch in a muscle tank and cut off shorts, and was like, do I have time to shower or change? And he said no. But if I was uncomfortable at all I should just kick him under the table and we could leave. It was so simple. But I'd never felt so thoroughly supported or accepted and I just knew he was my person. 5 years later we're 2 months happily married. When I realized we had fun without having to go anywhere or do anything. It just all came so naturally. I already had a feeling. But when my BF met my mom for the first time, she and I are really close. When we got to her apartment and had some wine she started getting really chatty as she is wont to do. She started telling my boyfriend all about her dating problems and failed relationships. He was so patient and really listened to her, asking questions, offering input every now and then. It was slightly embarrassing because she was clearly tipsy. But I loved how natural it felt to be sitting there with my two favorite people in the world just chatting about life. I just remember getting up to go to the bathroom so I could have a small cry in private because I knew he was the one. We are getting married next fall. She stuck with me through cancer. I knew after the first month of treatment I would marry her. Edit. I told her about this comment blowing up and she said, what was I supposed to do? I love you. Thanks so much for all the amazing wishes and happiness sent our way. For anyone dealing with that or anything else, please make sure you talk to someone. It helps. I promise. Mid-conversation on our very first date we each said, I f***ing hate sandals. In perfect unison. When, after spending the most amazing 6 months of my life with her, she got a letter saying her request for a visa extension had been denied. My grandmother was in the final moments of life from pretty severe lung cancer. Bedridden. Home healthcare. Body getting pretty stiff already. That man changed her diapers. Cleaned her. Cared for her. I've never seen anyone just do the right thing without being asked. Without questioning it. Without hesitation. Any second thoughts I had about him vanished. Someone so inherently good from the core is so rare. I took him to meet my parents. And he met my childhood kitty, who was very old by then, 19 or 20, and had always been kind of aloof and independent. Not a lap cat at all. He sat on the couch and patted it for her to jump up. She doesn't do that. I told him. And anyway she's too old to do it now. She jumped up onto his lap and settled down for him to pet her, purring loudly. We've been married for decades. He was in my kitchen in his underwear, looking through my cabinets. He pulled out a little plastic container of sunflower seeds and shook it like America. I realized just how much and how often he made me laugh. She randomly got up when we were watching TV and ran to one side of the room. "I love you from here," she said as she ran to the other side of the room. Upon reaching the other wall she looked incredibly upset and looks at me. Oh. I ran out of room. I was pretty sure I wanted to and was debating proposing to her, but that was when I knew that I was going to marry her. The words "I love you from here" are inscribed on my wedding band. When she or you are on your deathbed she will say to "here" is the last thing he ever hear from her. I came home from work and my dog and my roommate's dog had gotten into a nasty fight. My dog, smaller, got the worst of it and needed immediate attention. I called him and could barely get any words out between sobs. He drove over, picked us up and took us to the emergency vet. He sat in the vet's office with me and held me when the vet said they needed to keep my girl overnight for observation. He also paid half the bill, which was pretty hefty. My dog is fine. She would massage my arms and hands after a long day's work. And she made sure I never felt guilty that I fell asleep while she was doing it. She wholly and unconditionally cared for my well-being. R.I.P. These make me want to find my someone. A smaller example because I'm not getting married anytime soon. But the guy I'm casually seeing right now has all sorts of these really sweet moments. Most recently, I told him that my mom had sent me a package. He asked what she had sent. And I told him she always sent peppermint cookies after Halloween as a get ready for Christmas type of thing. I opened the package and exclaim how much I love peppermint cookies. I put them in the freezer and would grab some for us while we watched Netflix. 2 days later, I come home to a little package of peppermint cookies. From him. My heart about exploded. It was really sweet and thoughtful. It's funny how sometimes you think you're asking too much but really you're just asking the wrong person. Sometimes you think you're asking too much but really you're just asking the wrong person. This is so spot on. I'm stealing this. The moment my dog I had throughout my abusive relationship, X, who was also abused and had issues with males, jumped onto his lap and gave him kisses without hesitation. It's like he was giving me the seal of approval. Been 4 years happily married. Edit. At the time, we had this small 1-bed/1-bath apartment that was lakeside in the complex we lived. We always loved when the ducks came around because they chose our lake to have and raise ducklings before leaving for the cold weather. One morning, I woke up and came out to the living room to see her sitting outside on the back patio. In her PJs. Facing the lake. Feeding the ducks. And humming to herself. Maybe it was the way the sunrise hit her and the water. Maybe it was her messy but still adorable bedhead. But she looked like the most gorgeous thing I'd ever seen. Just the whole picture. I knew right then I wanted to marry this woman. 5 years after she literally kidnapped me to save my life while I had an abscess in my jaw the size of a golf ball. She invited me to work in her coffee shop. Knowing I was living in a van, I saved her from her ex trying to strangle her. 2 days after her ex went to jail, she came home, put her hand on my shoulder, and kissed me. Not a deep passionate kiss but not a peck. Her son and daughter came home from school and it was the first time they didn't immediately hide in their room. I cooked spicy peanut butter sesame noodles. And when I served dinner her daughter who hates spicy food took a bite. I knew after almost a decade of homelessness that I was home and this was my family. We have been married for 4 years now and our son will be 2 in March. My husband decided to marry me when I drove a motorcycle up a mountain pass in Colorado. Context: he's had bikes since he was 16. And I had always been a passenger. I decided to get my license. And 2 months later we drove across the US for 9 weeks. We drive dual sports. And he wanted to do some trails on the trip. We went up a mountain pass, Engineer Pass near RA, which was too difficult for me. To the point where he told me that we were going to turn back. I told him I would make it up that effing mountain if it was the last thing I did. And he realized in that moment I wasn't doing it for him. Rather I'm a badass out there for me. He proposed at the top of the mountain with a ring he fashioned out of wire since he decided halfway up that this was it. It was perfect. TL. DR. Husband proposed at the top of a mountain after he watched me fight my way up it on a motorcycle. Edit. Context. When she pointed out a typo in the crossword on the 28th of April, 2017 while we were laying in bed. It was 4th of July. I was on the rooftop in Berkeley and she told me she was going to marry me and that I didn't have a choice. Where are you, honey? He took me to have my wisdom teeth pulled and then stayed to take care of me once home. The medicine made me very lethargic for a few days, so he helped me change those foul smelling cotton packings as needed. That's the guy you marry. We were doing long distance and chatting on Skype and watching TV together. An ad came on the TV with a Bridezilla bitching about a super expensive wedding dress not being good enough. I wrinkled my nose in disgust and said, when I get married it'll be in jeans and a white t-shirt. He said, sweet. I'll find a tuxedo shirt to match. Apostrophe. After my heart started beating again, I put him on hold and yelled at my roommate that I was gonna marry this guy. 6 months later I did. We're getting close to our 8th anniversary. When my mother passed and she happened to be visiting. We were long distance. And I couldn't think of anybody else I would rather be with to share my grief. That was 11 years ago. I've now been married 8 years and couldn't be happier. Also, to that extent my life has vastly improved since I've been with her. And I hope she feels the same. When he told me I was important. Not just to him. But in general. No one else has ever said that to me. Or made me feel that way. Showed me that he cared about me as a person. And not just who I was to him. So. Yeah. I'm going to marry that FK one day. BF. I know you're reading this. You've been warned. Just the sheer effort. Dropping everything if I had any issue arise. Helping me without being asked when I lost my job. Always being there. Calling to check on my son. Building a friendship with him and eventually claiming him as his own, treating him as such. Always responding to messages, phone calls even if all he could say was busy. You okay though? Reliability is lit. Fam. It wasn't honeymoon phase BS either. This started as friends before dating and has continued on throughout our relationship. It is a beautiful part of who he is as a person, and damn, it makes me feel so cared for and loved and important. I'm going to marry this guy so hard. She bailed me out of jail. Gotta love those Monopoly dates. I asked my now husband this. His reply was, at first I was like nah, but then later I was like yeah. Question mark? We were friends before dating and I told him I was going to see NKOTB in concert. I've loved them since I was little but grew up poor and never got to see them until I was in my 20s. And he brought me a comic book of theirs from the early 90s that he had stashed in his childhood bedroom the following day when he saw me at work. I texted my sister, wow. Might have met my soulmate. 8 years later. Married for over 2. Parents of 2 pugs and a baby girl on the way. When we were getting to really know each other when we first started dating. I had some really manipulative exes that destroyed my self-esteem and worth and had been ghosted so many times. Regardless if it was a 2-month relationship or 2-year relationship. We had been talking about trust as I was so worried he was gonna get annoyed of me and just ghost me like everyone else was just having an emotional moment. He told me that he knows I've been through some really hard stuff. But that he will wait for as long as it takes for me to learn to trust him. And that he will do whatever it takes to show me that I can trust him and that he's not running away. He's stolen my heart and I knew right then that I'm going to marry him. When he helped carry my grandmother's casket at her funeral and held me for the next few days while I grieved. I also found out I was pregnant 2 days after we buried her and his reaction was absolutely amazing. Edit. I can't believe the amount of trolls to my comment. When I catch my BF treating our dog like a baby. There is no specific moment. Just a lot of little moments. We have so much in common. We could be doing nothing. Yet as long as we are together we are having a good time. He has never judged me for my past. He doesn't want to hurt me or control me. Every moment I have to spend without him makes me sad. Unfortunately, he doesn't want to marry me. After I graduated college I decided to move to another state to pursue my ridiculous dream of becoming a zookeeper. We were high school sweethearts. But in my family everyone is divorced. Even 8 years of steady love from him hadn't convinced me that he wouldn't just decide to leave me one day. My own family leaves me. I'm not interesting or special. He told me not to worry. As soon as he was done with school he'd move to be with me. We'd see each other as much as possible until then. 2 years later he graduated and showed up on my doorstep. I never believed until that moment, 10 years into our relationship, that this could end happily. He's such a steady rock. Even my skittish heart had to admit this was forever. He has always been so wonderful and loving. He's funny, playful, nerdy, and can't keep anything clean to save his life. 14 years together. Almost 3 married. And I'm no longer waiting with bated breath for the other shoe to drop. Being married to him is the easiest and most fun thing I've ever done. About 6 months in, I was dealing with some emotional and mental baggage and was crying into her shirt. It wasn't the first time, but every time it happened she comforted me and swore up and down that she'd be there for me. Something clicked and I realized that if I couldn't at least make her smile every day I'd never be able to repay her for her kindness. Also, she figured out how to mix spinach into my food and make it taste good. I hate spinach. She wins. He was willing to do whatever whenever. He just wanted to hang out with me. We never got bored just hanging out. Don't mind me. Just reading these wholesome stories. What? I'm not crying alone in the dark. When we went to the supermarket to shop for groceries for the first time, it wasn't anything big or exciting, but we still had the nicest time together. It was so easy to see magic even in the mundane. Can't help but want this for the rest of my life. Hard choice between when he immediately wanted to teach me how to play all his video games or 5 years later when I finally fully realized he really does despise cheating as much as I do. I thought you meant cheat codes. I f***ing hate them. I was living with him for a few days in the very early part of us officially being in a relationship. Weird time in between apartments. We were sleeping in a twin bed and I had to work earlier than he did. I woke up in a puddle of my own blood. Panicked. Showered. And just quickly left. When I got back to his place I was still super embarrassed and ready to super apologize. Instead I walked into fresh sheets and zero conversation about it until years later. When you're 20 and a dude doesn't freak out about period blood, that's true love. When she said yes. I'm not a talkative person. My wife is a talker. After about a year of dating she asked me a question and then changed her voice and answered her own question word for word with what I would have said. She then proceeded to have an entire conversation between herself and me saying exactly what I would have said had I been talking. I realized no one on earth would ever know me and accept me as completely as she did. We just celebrated 3 years of marriage recently. He made me laugh so hard that I actually peed myself. And then he wasn't weird about the fact that I peed myself, which was super gross and embarrassing. He should have made a big deal about that. We had a late night craving for Waffle House. I watched him make sure that none of his food touched. Then watched him eat every bit of his eggs. Every bit of his bacon. Then every bit of his hash browns. And all I could do was laugh because it's exactly how I eat my food. Then on the way back to my place, we both sang the same random 80s country song all the way through without hesitation. I knew I really was going to love him forever and ever. Amen. When he told me that he'd rearranged plans we'd had with our friends to go out next weekend for a few weekends later instead. Me, completely clueless, asked him why. His response was that he was fairly sure I'd be on my period then, and although I'd not mentioned it he knew that I was really suffering with pain for the last few months. He didn't want me to have to try and put a brave face on if I was in pain or feel bad about cancelling on friends at the last moment. That he thought this much about how I'd feel and had been paying attention to the things I didn't say confirmed it for me. I just told this joke in another thread today. He was a one night stand that wouldn't leave. So after 3 years I figured I'd marry him and then he'll leave, but he just brought all his tea and moved in. Been married 12 happy years. The deciding factor was seeing how good he was for my kid. Previous marriage. That was the clincher. I have terrible anxiety where sometimes I'm just unable to do simple tasks. I take medication for it, but sometimes it's not enough. But no matter how anxious I am, one strong hug from him always calms me down to normal. It's a miracle. 3+ years together and it's never failed. I'll never let go of that. I hadn't seen her in 18 years and within 5 minutes of being together I just knew. I was expecting it to be awkward, but it was like we had never been separated. She hadn't changed a lick. The Billy Joel song Just the Way You Are was playing in my head and I was floored. 3 days later she asked and I was so happy. She's moving 3,000 miles to be with me and in 18 days we'll be married. He had me move in with him and quit working so I could focus on school. And when I told him that if I wasn't working full time and just in school it meant I totally had time to raise a puppy that I had wanted for years but hadn't got because of the whole working and school thing. And that's how I ended up with a puppy. Who's now a dog. And I graduate in December and have an awesome job. And we dropped off the heirloom stones to go into the custom ring he picked last week. When I realized that my time felt more valuable when I was with her. We often would have multiple conversations where we checked the time and it was 3 or 4 AM and it felt like we just started talking. I recognized that the person who I lost track of time talking to was the one I felt most comfortable around. Security is a huge thing that people talk about. But this overwhelming sense of peace was something I never felt with anyone else before. Except her. Anyway, I could go on and on. Here's a little something I wrote about her. For anyone that cares to read this far. Sorry if this isn't the place for it. Thanks. She created worlds with her words. And I couldn't help but live in them. Each sentence a mountain rising. Every syllable an ocean stirring. The vowels, clouds, the consonants, trees. The periods. Commas. Exclamation and question marks, everything in between. Tilde. Again, sorry if this isn't the place for this. I didn't really have anywhere else to write it and this question made me think about it. Started dating my SO in college. Through a series of uninteresting events. I ended up sleeping on air mattress for a little bit. Anyways. We were getting into some business and I hear a slight hissing sound. We both realized it and stopped for a second to confirm that there was in fact a hole in it. After a moment of silence. He says. So are we just gonna ride it down? The first instant I laid eyes on her. Literally my first conscious thought was. I'm going to marry her. I told her about that a year later when we were engaged and she said she felt the exact same thing. How does this even happen to people? I told him I was pregnant. And he didn't even ask. He just went home and got his stuff and moved in. BTW. We are still married 23 years later. I already had 3 kids. 2. When we were living an hour apart. When I realized I had never met another human being who had understood me or cared for me as much as she does. We live with and take care of my boyfriend's grandpa. Once. Before it was actually defined. I accidentally called his house home and apologized right away. I'm just like that. Always saying sorry. But he smiled so big and kissed me right there. I knew someone that happy to have me call the place we stay together home was a keeper. There are many other instances similar to this. And I have never been happier. He is the best man I have ever met and the best thing to ever happen to me.